Good afternoon. So this is a moment in the conversation when we get to reflect on the very place that we're all sitting in right now. This is the man behind it to a very large degree, actually, and it's one of the largest projects in DC history, the Wharf. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of what it took to get here, and then we'll have Monty talk quite a bit more about that. The Wharf took more than 10 years to develop through several mayors and a few acts of Congress, actually. We'll talk about that. And it's not even finished. Part 2 is scheduled to be finished in 2022, and when done, it will feature more than 3.5 million square feet of development, including residences, offices, hotels, shops, restaurants, cultural uses, marinas, and public areas, including waterfront parks, promenades, piers, and docks. And all of that stuff, I know, was a big part of your emphasis, is those public spaces, which we'll also talk about. This area around us is so dramatically different from what it was just a few years ago. For those of you who do not live in DC as we do, it's hard to kind of appreciate that. So to understand that, let's actually first look at an image from 75 years ago when the Wharf looked even different than it did just a few years ago. So tell us about this image.
This was, I think, 1946, thereabouts, and the Wharf was the port for the city. That's what L'Enfant actually imagined it to be. And it was a working port to bring the goods in and out. Of course, that faded with the railroad and then later the truck. Those were market disruptors of their time. So right after this image, I would say the shore and all its mercantile equipment and use purpose started going downhill, so to speak, commercially, into the 50s and into the 60s, which then led to, as you know, urban renewal, which was the first and worst in our country. So this entire area was eradicated by the federal government, and people were displaced, tens of thousands of people. And we lived with that scar for a couple of generations.
Yeah, so let's talk about that as the starting point. So when you came to this project, what remained was this area where buildings had been demolished and people had been ejected, and that memory was very strong within the neighborhood.
Yes.
And what was in this neighborhood of Southwest, although not quite on the waterfront, was some people of modest means, mostly residential, not that much commercial development. How did you think about that as you approached this project?
Well, I saw this as an extraordinary opportunity because the shoreline itself was squandered. Back in the 60s, the whole urban planning was all about the car. And not really a waterfront redevelopment that other cities experienced in the later 70s and 80s. This sat behind. So there was a tremendous opportunity, and there was a well-established community nearby that had been established after the urban renewal. So that was in place. There was a fish market that remains today. That fish market has been there for 200 years and will be there for another 200 years. But beyond that, it was mostly a sort of a tourist area that would come into, and boats in the water, but it was more like a boat parking lot. It wasn't a real lively marina.
So let's take a look at what it looks like today now. We're missing that middle period when there wasn't much here, but
yeah.
You all have seen it also if you've walked around at all. But this is kind of, you can tell how much has happened since that time, certainly. What was the greatest challenge in getting from there to here?
I would say in the macro is just getting people to believe, because the definition of Southwest was what it was for a couple of generations, and we really needed a big idea. And I felt like it needed to be a big bang in terms of development. If we would have put just one apartment building here, we could not have changed the paradigm. If we would have put just one hotel, I'm certain it would have failed. We had to go big, which was about $1.7 billion right out of the gate onto it to create what we have today. We're, of course, building phase 2 right now, but that was the biggest challenge, getting the capital together, getting the entitlements, getting land control, and doing all that through the recession. It was a very dark period, actually.
Yeah, and there are a lot of government officials and government-adjacent folks in the audience. Can you talk about what your interaction was like going through kind of the process of
Well, I would say that the first of all, it was collaborative. It was very good, but there was a sort of a tepid response in early stages because it was so big, and I understand that. Everyone has a certain risk-averse nature for good reason. But it wasn't really until we got towards maintaining all control of the site, and then started knocking down some of the obstructions in the way and getting some entitlements done. By the way, we had 8 council votes to change laws for this, $200 million TIF pilot to pay for infrastructure, and 4 acts of Congress. It was about halfway through that whole process when the political side of things, I think, started really getting on board. And I think it became intellectually acceptable for others to believe in it too. So the Capitol, from commercial tenants and others, everyone started, climbing on.
I do want to talk to you about one of the acts of Congress in particular that we talked about briefly, which is this notion of what kind of changes you had to make to the actual physical waterfront and how you had to change the shape of it.
It looked like a saw kind of on the record maps, and we had to straighten it out. And we had just had a lot of record keeping to keep up with that. And then we needed the water itself. Federal government controls about 95% of all the shoreline and water around the District of Columbia, both for defense and grandeur. And for us to do this right, we really needed the city to control that so we could make the deal with the city. And so one of the acts of Congress was getting the federal government to cede control of the water to the city so that we could work with the city.
Yeah. So thinking about the design of the space for a moment, one of the things that was interesting about your conception of this is that you approached the outdoor space through an interior design lens rather than a landscape lens. Can you explain your thinking on that?
And by the way, I have to give credit to Stan Exted too on this. He was our urban planner for this, and as far as guiding principles and creating sort of chaos, if you will, intentioned chaos and intimate spaces where people would enjoy, that was important. And part of that was having different experiences as you go along the wharf. And originally we had landscapers providing us with that. But to take that to one more level, we actually got an interior designer to help us on these exterior spaces, because the landscapers were interested in the trees and the plants and the pavers, but the interior designer was interested in the people and intimate spaces and socialization and that. So it influenced a great deal of the texture that we have around the wharf. If you walk up and down the wharf, you'll actually see, and you can see actually in this photo in the background, there's actually lampshades on our light poles. Those are from an interior designer. They put lampshades on. That was to diffuse the light, so it'd be a little bit more romantic. And there's all these small texture things that subliminally don't jump out at you, but it's what creates this environment we enjoy.
What was the kind of feeling that you were going for?
Well, we were going for the space where people just want to stay, that they're not feeling intimidated. I think the architecture and the technology all serve the people, not the other way. I'm not a big fan of object architecture. I don't think we should stand and fawn over the buildings. I think the buildings are there to serve us. I think the public realm is there to serve us. And so these sort of texture pieces are there to make people feel good and comfortable and to initiate this street theater, which is what we have today. It allows us to program it, allows us to put events out here. Even our retail, our food and beverage, we have a lot of outdoor cafes, indoor, outdoor things, and it makes a big difference for people watching and people participating. So I was looking for something that makes people happy.
Sure. There was a slide up a moment ago. Actually, I don't know if we go backwards or not. There we go. No, the other one. So this goes back to a related point of how you do programming in the space.
Yeah.
So speak a little bit about that through the lens of who were you trying to attract? What is the audience that you were envisioning coming to this space when you were designing it?
Well, we're looking for a neighborhood. So we're looking for everybody: kids, families, elderly, couples, everybody. And so our programming is suited for everybody. This here you're seeing some children playing Scrabble. This is the same area we put an ice skating rink in the winter, and we put corn toss for the younger people, not this young, but the drinking younger people. And you have all these different things happening and create this sort of mosh pit of activity. So that's sort of what we're looking for. It isn't structured or linear in any way. This here is just one, frankly, small program of many, many things that we do. So it's for everybody. It's similar to the housing that we have here. We have about 30% affordable housing here. And that affordable housing goes down to 30% AMI and 60% AMI and 80% AMI. That's about 350 residences here, which didn't exist before. Thank you, take that. So it's real important you create that life. It's not just the affordable units, but affordable lifestyle. And so that this is for everybody. It is not elitist resort. That is not what we're about or wanted to try to create. So I think the diversity and really the community and uniting people. We have actually a fire pit out on, it's right over here in District Square with real wood. And we have a little camper that we put out there, and you can buy marshmallows and graham crackers and chocolate. You make s'mores over the fire. And it's amazing to see the older people love it, kids love it, of course. But people group and commune there. It's just phenomenal. So you have all those different things happening at one time. You probably have the anthem, which holds 6,000 people. You could have a rock band in the anthem while that's going on, and something else just up the street.
Yeah, so let's go back to affordable housing. So you mentioned you have 30% affordable housing, and you explained what that entails. You also have some quite high rents. Obviously, that's part of the conceit.
Unaffordable.
More than $1,000 per square foot in some instances, and maybe going up from there. I understand the second part might be even more expensive. So DC has been fast gentrifying in a lot of ways, and I'm sure you've heard many people's concerns that there are ancillary effects to this kind of luxury housing, additional construction, and what it will mean, especially for some people who already lived in the quadrant of Southwest. How do you think about your impact on that larger phenomenon, and whether you have an impact on that?
I'm very proud of our impact. As I said, we're adding 350 affordable residences that didn't exist before. There was a liveaboard community before we got here of 94 people who lived on their boats. We protected that, and they are still here. Capital Yacht Club, many of those live on their boats, and we protected that. We also have, at the height of development, 2,500 jobs. Many of them were district residents. Ongoing in terms of the tenancy, and the Wharf Phase 1 is completely full. Produces tremendous amount of jobs, as well as when Phase 2 is complete, over $70 million a year in tax revenue to the city. Much of that can go towards affordable housing and other mission points that the city has. This area did not produce more than $3 million in annual taxes before we got here. So on all levels, and I think the biggest thing really is community, bringing people together. And we embrace the neighborhood, the established neighborhood that's next to us. We have a good relationship with them, and we earn that trust every day because we're very inconveniently, Phase 2 is a disruptor. I get that, but that'll be over in 2022. And so, it's real important to meld everything together.
So let's bring up one more photo of the fish market. You mentioned the fish market earlier. This was one of the few things that was here before this new development. Some would say it's got a different kind of more casual vibe to it. One could dispute whether or not that's true, but it's sustained, and it's one of the last fish markets of its kind in the U.S. How do you think about how that fits into your development, how you can allow them to coexist into the future, and how you can protect the market?
Well, I mean, it's a creative. Everything we're doing is a creative to this mission here of maintaining barges with, selling of food. So, as I said, this will be here for another 200 years. And we're very excited about the relationship with what was here, and working that with the future. This is next to Rappahannock Oysters, which is a third-generation farmer of oysters, as well as a rum distillery where we make our own rum, and a couple of others that we actually were tenants on the fish market side. We brought in to sell ice cream and do other things. So, no, we work with the established community here.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Nicole.